off to Jonathan Taylor. Huge hole. He's at the 30. He's going to go. 10, 5, touchdown. Jonathan Taylor made a man miss the line of scrimmage and then runs it into Pater. And a one-handed INT. Are you kidding me? Kenny Moore.
What a play by Nyheim Hines.
Horseshoe is back, baby. The horseshoe is back.
What's going on, Colts Nation? Welcome back to another episode of the Bring the Juice Colts podcast. Cody Felger, Derek Larchview joining you as always. So today we continue our in-depth look at a couple of these different position groups for the Indianapolis Colts. And today we are going to talk about the linebackers, and then we'll have to discuss the defensive backs here very shortly, but today goes the linebackers, and I'll start this one off. So first guy we'll talk about here is Darius Leonard. Now, Cody, I know you and I were talking about this before the episode aired, and I kind of wanted to take a little moment, not to be mean. I don't want to be mean here, but I do have to have a little bit of a lesson here. I do have to say something. Brett Coleman, if you ever watch this podcast, you probably won't, but I mean, just in case you do, I sincerely hope you'll take back your statement on where you said that there were things that Dont'a Hightower of the New England Patriots does things that Darius Leonard can't, and there are things that Darius Leonard can't do that Dont'a Hightower can't. I really hope you take this back, because I've been looking through the numbers, okay? I've already looked through the numbers here. Hightower has played in 8 seasons with the New England Patriots, and Leonard has played 3. And in that time frame, let's just talk about what Dont'a Hightower can maybe do better than Leonard. Well, let's look at the tackle numbers. Okay, so he has 314 solo tackles in his career so far. 314. Darius Leonard has 268. You're only beating him by 50 solo tackles, and you played in for nearly 3 times the amount of years, my guy. Okay, so there's that. You want to talk about sacks? Okay, so Dont'a Hightower has 25 and a half sacks in his career. Darius Leonard has 15. So 2/3 of the sacks in less than a third of the time. And you want to talk about turnovers? Sorry, Darius Leonard absolutely smokes Dont'a Hightower in the turnover category. In 2019, I want to make sure I get this right. In 2019, he had more turnovers forced, Darius Leonard did, than Dont'a Hightower has in his whole career. In one season, has more turnovers forced than what Dont'a Hightower has done throughout his entire career as a linebacker. Okay, so he obviously doesn't beat him in that. So he doesn't really beat him in tackling. He really doesn't do anything with the sack numbers that Darius Leonard's putting up. He certainly is nowhere close to forcing turnovers. So I'd really like for you to explain to us, if you could tell me, like, you know, what he exactly does better than Darius Leonard. But I'm curious about that. But anyways, enough of that. I mean, we'll just get back into the actual argument here about Darius Leonard and a more in-depth breakdown on this guy. I mean, what else is there really to talk about? I mean, really is a turnover machine, just a game-breaking linebacker, should be in everybody's top 5 linebackers. You know, in my opinion, is statistically the best linebacker in football right now. And, you know, a top 3 linebacker, no question. I mean, just the amount of energy and the juice that this guy brings every game. And not only to games, but to, you know, actually to just practices themselves, you know, makes things so much fun. And we're really going to see what Darius Leonard's made of this year after, you know, his buddy and teammate Anthony Walker moved to Cleveland. We're going to see just how much of a leader and how much Darius Leonard's able to keep up with losing Anthony Walker and having to take the reins. But Cody, you have anything else on Darius Leonard?
I mean, yeah, I think you talked about it pretty well, and you said about everything I would say. I'll just say this, like, okay, if you look at some of those top linebackers, I'm sure there's things that, Bobby Wagner does better than Darius Leonard. I'm sure there's things that other linebackers do better, but Darius Leonard is such a good player, and just all the ways, like you mentioned, just the turnovers, which is so huge. Like, in my opinion, no doubt he's a top 5 linebacker. Like, every linebacker has things they're really, really good at and things that other players are better in. But Darius Leonard's bread and butter definitely has been just his production, whether that's tackles, whether that's sacks, whether that's turnovers forced. He does about everything for you. Still fairly young, which is crazy to think about. He's only a couple years in the league, and he's already putting up those historic numbers. I mean, he led the league, actually, in his rookie season in tackles, if I'm not mistaken. So this is just telling you how good this guy is as a linebacker. He's the heart and soul of this defense, and he just continues, like you mentioned, to bring the juice, man, every single day. You see him even in the practice cams and stuff like that. He's just continuing to bring that energy to this defense. And so he is so, so important to what this defense does and how they like to predicate themselves on forcing turnovers. And he's just one of those guys. Yeah, he has flaws. Every player does in certain ways. But one thing that's not questioned is his intensity and his turnover-prone mentality. I mean, it's definitely a great addition to this Colts defense, exactly what this defense needs at their linebacker core. And, you couldn't ask for a better player here from Darius Leonard.
Also, I just also want to mention that, there's only one player in the history of the league that has more tackles in his first 3 years than what Darius Leonard does, and that's Luke Kuechly. I mean, and Luke Kuechly, in a lot of people's opinions, might potentially go down as a Hall of Fame linebacker because there's very few that have played the game the way Luke Kuechly has. So, he's in really good company, okay? Deontay Hightower never has been an all-pro level. Darius Leonard's already made it twice. So, I mean, Darius Leonard, he's got a pedigree that a lot of these other linebackers wish they could have. So,
and he's got a chip on his shoulder unlike any other player I've seen.
Yeah.
It's crazy. Like, he takes that hate that people spew or the negative criticism, and he uses it as fuel. And I've never seen a player do it as much and feed off of it as much as Darius Leonard does. And it just makes him a better player, so you can't complain there.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, let's talk about the next guy, the future Hall of Famer. At least that's what Pat McAfee would say. And that is Bobby Okereke. So Bobby Okereke, this last year, a lot of question marks on him if he would step up and do a lot of different things. Took a lot of extra snaps this year, took him away from Anthony Walker, because he's the more athletic guy that can go and cover people and cover a lot more ground than what Anthony Walker could. I mean, there was a lot of harsh criticism for Okereke last year. There were a couple games where he seemed out of place at times, but, he's still a young player, only entering his 3rd year. And I really do have a lot of high expectations for Bobby Okereke and what he's able to provide this team. He certainly is athletic, definitely can cover a lot more guys. I'm really excited to see what Okereke does for this team.
Yeah, I mean, people seem to forget his rookie season. He was ranked as the best rookie linebacker in the NFL by Pro Football Focus. And so he's a guy that is just, I think he's going to really solidify that middle linebacker position if he already hasn't already. I mean, you mentioned it. I think his jump he jumped. He made a jump definitely from year 1 to year 2. I don't know if it was as significant as, say, Akari Willis was or what we potentially were expecting, but he's still a very good player in his own right. And I think the big thing you want from Okereke is just a few more turnovers, maybe just around the ball a little bit more. But all in all, I thought Bobby Okereke, he's been really good in his first 2 years. I think there's definitely things, like I mentioned, he has to grow in, and he will grow in. But yeah, definitely now with that middle linebacker hole being presumably wide open for him to take it, I think he has a great opportunity to really ascend here in year number 3.
Yeah, and from what it sounds like, a lot of people are saying that Okereke is going to primarily be the new middle linebacker for the Indianapolis Colts because, again, his ability to stop the run is really good. He fills holes really well, just like Anthony Walker did. And that would make sense in a lot of different ways and kind of gives way for other guys who, the rest of this group, which we're about to talk about, is not very experienced, so there's a lot of different options here for guys to, come in and do stuff, which the next guy we're going to talk about, that's Zaire Franklin, the 25-year-old. I mean, it's pretty insane, he's only played in 16 total games, throughout his young NFL career so far, only 10 tackles. So, not much experience there, but, he is getting reps at starting linebacker so far in the offseason. That's what it sounds like. They're trying to see if they can get him to work that. Just depends on whether or not they want to put him in the middle or they want to put him at the strong side. But, Zaire Franklin, just like everyone else that we're about to talk about in this group, Cody, has something to prove here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he's been more reserved to special teams because there just hasn't been really a need for another linebacker to step it up. And Zaire Franklin, he's had some starting experience, which you feel a little bit more comfortable with. In that 2018 season, if you remember, he was the starting Sam linebacker for a few games there. So it's not like he's coming in with no experience at all at the NFL level. But you're right, he still has something to prove. Former 7th-round pick. It's actually been crazy that he's been able to stay on this roster as a 7th-round pick in 2018. And now's his opportunity. If there was any better opportunity, it's now for Zaire Franklin to potentially go and take that Sam linebacker spot. I mean, the good thing with Derek, with this Sam linebacker spot, ideally it's not going to have a whole lot of snaps. It's not really going to determine the outcome of the game a whole lot because they're not going to be on the field a ton. But you want a solid guy in there that you feel comfortable with. I think Zaire Franklin, from an experience standpoint, is probably the number one guy, number one candidate to take it right now. But obviously we'll see. But, yeah, he definitely has a lot to prove to potentially earn that spot.
Yeah, and, with a lot of these guys, and, this is kind of the situation last year. Remember, we took Anthony Walker out for obvious pass down situations, 3rd and longs and such, to be able to allow guys like Bobby Okereke and Darius Leonard to do what they do best, which is being able to cover people. And, that was obviously a weakness for Zaire Franklin going forward. But here's another guy that we're talking about that could emerge as a dark horse candidate to take the linebacker spot, and that is EJ Speed. Was drafted in 2019. He's actually older than Zaire Franklin, which, if you can believe that or not, is actually 26. So that's quite crazy. But EJ Speed, just a physical specimen, unlike a lot of people. 6'5", 230 pounds. Came in to Tarleton State as a wide receiver. Wanted to originally be a wide receiver, but, moved away from that and became, their stud linebacker. And, when you look at the dimensions of this guy and you look at the athleticism he has, it makes the almost total sense that if you could get this guy to think more like a linebacker, that it almost makes total sense to put somebody like this on the field for your defense, just running around tackling people.
Yeah, the thing he just needed was experience. Fortunately, he got a little bit of that in his rookie season, that 2019 preseason. You saw him; he was all over the field. He was a physical freak in those preseason games. He was the leading tackler in multiple of those games. So he is very much in that Darius Leonard type of role, in very prototypical Chris Ballard late round pick, just a physical specimen. You talked about it. And yeah, if he can figure out, put on maybe a little bit more weight from, I don't know, he may have put on a little bit more muscle, all that kind of stuff from where he was in the 2019 preseason. I'm sure he's done that. He has a couple years in the system now, fortunately. So you feel a little bit better about, maybe he's a lot more pro ready than he was a couple of years ago. But yeah, he's definitely the dark horse candidate to take this. He's just a lot of unknown right now with him. I think the safer option is a Zaire Franklin, but the more high upside option is EJ Speed with how physically gifted he is. And, fortunately, like I mentioned, he won't have a major bearing on if a game is won or lost at that Sam linebacker position. And who knows, if you give him a little bit more exposure and he shows you good things, maybe he gets a little bit more playing time down the road. If Bobby Okereke or Darius Leonard need a couple snaps off, need a rest or whatever, or get banged up, you feel more confident about a guy like him really stepping into those roles, no problem, because he's got the physical abilities of both those guys, maybe even more so than both those guys.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, now we'll talk about another guy here who you've talked about quite often about, trying to fill that Sam linebacker role. a lot more often, and that's Matthew Adams. Really hasn't seen a whole lot of the field, especially on the defensive side of the ball. He has been more of a practice guy and a special teams guy every now and again. But, another late round pick that Ballard was hoping to try to get more out of, but just hasn't really gone his way. He's been situational guy at the most. Do you see a scenario where Adams gets the potential for this kind of position?
I do. I do, because he was a starting Sam linebacker at the end of that 2018 season. If you remember that, the Colts started with Zaire Franklin, and then they transitioned to Matthew Adams. So he has experience too. He's a guy that I think he's more of that run-stopping linebacker, I think, than any of these guys. He's more of that thumper linebacker that you think of. So I think potentially he could fit that role really well, especially if the Colts go back to kind of how they liked that role in 2018. So I certainly could see that potentially happening if the Colts elect to go back to that. And if Matthew Adams, I think he's a good player. I just think he's kind of been buried in the depth chart. And I think if he gets an opportunity, you'll feel pretty good about any of these linebackers. It's kind of crazy, Derek. Like, people are kind of freaking out about the linebacker depth. I'm not so much. I feel like I've seen some of these guys in action, and I've been pretty all right with how I've seen them play. And ideally, they're really not going to see the field, but you feel like they'll do an okay job if one of these guys does go down. The two guys, especially Zaire Franklin and Matthew Adams, a little bit more on them. So I'm not as concerned, I guess, with these linebackers. These two guys, I feel all right about them. I feel like they have some experience in this defense, and they can be coming in a pinch when needed. And obviously the Colts felt the same way with really not addressing linebacker in free agency or in the draft.
Yeah, totally. All right. Well, let's kind of round out here and talk about these last three guys that were brought in over the last few years. That is Jordan Glasgow. Remember, was drafted in the 6th round of last year's draft. Was, a special team stud. He had a lot of great tackles and a lot of great plays for Indianapolis on special teams this year, has a relentless motor. And then you have Sky Moore, who took the year off last year due to COVID. And then Malik Jefferson, who they picked up in free agency this offseason. Again, more of a special teams guy. But what do you think of these three guys rounding this position group out? Are they just going to stick with the special teams, or do we see something happen with these guys?
I think special teams is the best case scenario for these guys. Sky Moore's got a little bit more experience, I guess, than any of these other guys, but I'm really, I don't really anticipate any of these three guys really challenging for playing time. They weren't supposed to, challenge for playing time. And so I really don't see that happening personally. I think it's between those three guys I just mentioned. So obviously one of these guys could completely surprise and be an absolute stud in the preseason and training camp. But as it stands right now, based off of what I know of these guys, I don't really think there's much of a chance they're a starter for you.
Yeah, I agree. All right, let us know what you guys think of the linebacker group. Do you guys like the depth? Who do you think makes the starting spot for that middle linebacker or the strong side linebacker spot this year? What do you think of the depth piece? Is there somebody we're missing that you thought could really be that new guy coming in to help fill that role? But thank you guys so much for tuning in. Let us know what you think. And as always, go Colts.